for many years, they had been saying, no, there's no problem. One almost felt it was sort of women being patted on the head and said, there, dear, don't worry, you know, you're imagining it, or it's not, you don't know, we know better than you do.
We need real leadership. Right now, we should have a president who is using his bully pulpit to condemn the fatal shooting that happened last night. We should not see military tanks in riot gear, cops in riot gear on the streets.
Rush around with their hair on fire saying, oh my God. I mean, this is a new discovery, and the museum is discovering things all the time, and there are going to be more things that are going to be happening in here that some people are going to be screaming about, but that's the museum learning.
Rehearsals stopped a week before the show many months ago, and the only reason we were allowed to return and specifically rehearse is because we were tested. So every morning we have a swab either in the nose or the throat, and then we get a wristband, and then that means, you know, we're negative for that day.
Now, the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, is urging the government to consider redress for the victims of the pregnancy test drug Primodos. In an exclusive interview with Sky News, Mrs May identified the scandal as one example of the burning injustices she vowed to tackle when taking back power in 2016. She claimed victims who said the drug caused their children birth defects weren't listened to properly and were essentially patted on the head.
A new film documents a Sky News investigation and a 40-year battle by campaigners against a pharmaceutical giant. All about a pill called Primodos, used as a pregnancy test in the 1960s and 70s, which parents believed caused malformations to their babies in the womb. An untold part of that story is the role of a former Prime Minister.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that those families do now deserve justice, and there should be a chance to launch a public inquiry into this terrible scandal?
Prime Minister!
My honourable friend has raised an important issue.
Theresa May called for a review into Primodos after pressure from her own MPs and after reading a scientific review in 2017 which had found there wasn't a link between the drug and malformations, but she felt didn't make a convincing case.
Certainly when I looked at the report, I felt that it wasn't the slam-dunk answer that people had said it was. I explained within my number 10 team that I think that we should look at this, that we should have a review on this. Ultimately, if the Prime Minister decides it should go ahead, then it will go ahead.
Did you get any pushback?
Well, I don't think those around the healthcare system were too pleased at the idea that there was going to be some further work on this and on other issues. Because for many years they had been saying, no, there's no problem. One almost felt it was sort of women being patted on the head and said, there, dear, don't worry, you know, you're imagining it, or it's not, you don't know, we know better than you do.
In July, the Cumberledge review team found that there was avoidable harm caused by a failure to regulate Primodos. Their report said victims should get a government apology and funding from the state and manufacturer. Reading it left lead campaigner Mary Lyon almost speechless.
That's more than I expected.
It's incredible that somebody like Mary Lyon and other campaigners have held fast to this campaign despite all the many potential setbacks they've had in terms of the government and healthcare professionals trying to stop them in their tracks.
Would you have any message to the manufacturer?
Well, I think they need to perhaps to look at the history of this. At the time that Primodos was still being prescribed and people were still taking Primodos, that there was a known risk, a known potential risk, and ask themselves whether it was right for that to have carried on.
This Prime Minister will be remembered for troubled Brexit negotiations and internal party battles over the EU. But she'll hope this and other inquiries into Hillsborough, child sexual abuse and contaminated blood will also be part of her legacy.
Well, we're joined now by Nikki Gubbins. Her mother took Primodos during her pregnancy, and Primodos campaigner Charlotte Fensom. Her brother Stephen has severe epilepsy and she and her family care for him. Very good evening to you both. Thanks for joining us. We also heard from Theresa May there talking about the issue of redress. We've seen campaigners in the States getting millions of pounds and all of this. And I just wonder how you feel, whether or not it is even possible to compensate for what you've been through, what your mother's been through, what Charlotte and her family have been through.
Well, no amount of money can make up the suffering and pain and what I've been through, the family and all the other families involved. I mean, the history knows that we've had children that have now passed away. Obviously, no amount of money would compensate for that. But I think the redress is more of like ensuring that nothing like this ever happens again to others.
Oh, Charlotte, I saw you nodding along sincerely there. When it comes to redress, surely compensation would go a long way for your family, where you're having to do round-the-clock care and pay for that.
It would. I mean, redress is very important to us, but I'd like to make a distinction between redress and compensation with pots of cash. We are not looking for a lavish lifestyle and a bank account full of money. This won't bring my brother's life back. It won't give his brain back. It won't give my parents the life that they have lost over the last 52 years caring for essentially a 52-year-old baby.
Extensive medical tests are being carried out on Russia's opposition leader Alexei Navalny, following claims he became seriously ill after drinking a cup of tea laced with poison. The prominent critic of President Putin arrived in Germany a few hours ago to receive specialist treatment after falling into a coma on Thursday. Let's speak to Marina Litvinenko. She's the widow of Alexander Litvinenko, and he was killed after being poisoned by radioactive polonium in a central London hotel. Thank you so much for talking to us this afternoon. It must be particularly difficult for you to watch what's happening at the moment. What was your first thought when you heard about Mr. Navalny getting sick on that plane?
First of all, when I heard it 2 days ago, of course, it was very devastating. Alexei Navalny was a very active and very critical to Russian regime, but he escaped from a very serious damages. He was arrested. He spent a lot of time in custody, like 10 days, 15 days, but it was not so much serious. Of course, his brother was arrested and spent a few years in prison, but Alexei Navalny was more or less safe. And when I heard this news, I was very shocked.
When there were reports that he's been taken ill on a plane flying to Moscow. Was that your initial thought?
No, first of all, if we're talking about how it's all happened, he was traveling from Siberia's cities, Tomsk to Moscow, and what happened to him? It was so unexplained, and plane need to be landed just emergency in another city, Siberian city, Omsk, when he was stayed for 2 days, but everybody understood it was a very dangerous situation because nobody believed he would be treated in the right way. And now we might be a little bit safe because we know he's transported to Germany, to Berlin, and now he's under control of German doctors. And this is a little bit easier to talk about this situation. But I don't think we need to be relaxed because we still don't know what happened to Alexei yet.
What do you make of the doctor at the Omsk hospital saying that it was something to do with blood sugar?
Even more, they say it is metabolic disease. It's quite strange. Of course, it may be symptoms like that, but I don't think is the reason why Alexei became so extremely ill because of that. What doctors said, again, I can't be very critical to them, but I don't think there'll be so much freedom to say what they don't know. Or if you're going back to my story, my husband, Alexander, was treated in hospital here in UK, and almost for 2 weeks, nobody would recognize he was poisoned by radioactive material. Should I blame British doctors? Not, of course, because nobody before was poisoned by radioactive polonium. And now we don't know what happened to Alexei. And as soon we will know what happened to him and what poison or what agent was used against him, we could discuss what is the level of order. I mean, who wanted to stop him, to neutralize, or even to kill. And maybe we will see, would be able doctors in Russia to recognize what happened to Alexei.
On a personal note, for you, Marina, it must be difficult to watch what's happening to Navalny at the moment.
The most, what I do feel, it's for family of Alexei Navalny, his wife, his children, and his parents.
A teenager has been arrested after 2 people were shot dead during another night of Black Lives Matter protests in Wisconsin. The protests followed the shooting of a black man in the state. It happened on the 3rd day of unrest after Jacob Blake was shot 7 times on Sunday in the city of Kenosha. Joining me now from Washington is Kristen Clark, President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. And Kristen, we look at what has happened over the last 3 nights. How concerned are you that the violence could well continue this evening?
Oh, I'm deeply concerned. The crisis of police violence and racial violence has been literally tearing at the fabric of our nation. We have people who have been insistently marching and protesting and demanding reforms, and those efforts have fallen flat. Congress has yet to pass a bill that would respond to the deadly shooting of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. And here we are now in the wake of the fatal, not yet fatal, but the horrendous shooting of Jacob Blake. What deeply concerns me here is that people have the right to protest and to demonstrate at moments like these and express their outrage. And last night in Kenosha, Wisconsin, we saw what appeared to be white vigilantes who were patrolling the streets with automatic weapons. And there are now 2 people who have lost their lives. A man has been placed under arrest, but we don't know whether this shooting was racially motivated. But what we basically are seeing is the collision of police violence, racial violence, and white supremacy all coming to a head in our country.
We of course, were down there last night and today, and some of those who were out on the street said that they were out there because they were concerned about looting and violence towards their property. We saw our reporter there on a car lot where the windows had been smashed on the vehicles. Why are people concerned that their properties are going to be damaged? If they are concerned, haven't they got a right to go out and defend their property?
We should be deeply concerned about loss of life. We should be deeply concerned about the assaults perpetrated time and time again on unarmed Black people and other citizens in our country. People are marching and protesting and demonstrating, and they have a right to under our Constitution. There is no right to the violent vigilantism that we have been seeing in response. We know that the law enforcement had been out to protect property, but instead what we saw were armed individuals with AR-15s and automatic weapons patrolling the streets, and there are now 2 people dead and at least 1 person injured. And this no doubt marks a crisis in our country. And we are a nation on fire. We are a country that has yet to reckon with the bitter ugliness of police violence and racial violence that has gripped the nation.
Where do we go from here? How can the heat be taken out of this?
We need real leadership. Right now, we should have a president who is using his bully pulpit to condemn the fatal shooting that happened last night. Right now is a moment where we should not see military tanks and riot gear, cops in riot gear on the streets, because that has been proven to inevitably escalate tensions. The public is grieving. The public is tormented by a man, Jacob Blake, unarmed, who was shot in front of his 3 children while going into his car. They have a right under the Constitution to speak out, to demonstrate, and protest. That should be respected. We need to de-escalate the law enforcement presence, and we need our Congress to get to work to put in place the strong reforms that are needed to address police violence, which has beleaguered our nation for far too long.
After more than 23 weeks shut due to the coronavirus pandemic, the British Museum has reopened its doors to visitors today. There have, however, been some changes, both in health and safety precautions and what is on show. Joining me now is the former British Museum trustee, Bonnie Greer. Hello to you, Bonnie Greer. Hans Sloane bust. What's happened?
What's happened with what? Sloane?
Yes, with Sloane, the bust of Hans Sloane, the founding father of the British Museum. Where is he?
Oh, right. Okay. We took him off the pedestal and put him in a case with all his goods. And I helped rewrite the narrative about him because, you know, he got his money to be able to start the collection of the British Museum and the British Library and the Natural History Museum, by the way, through the slave trade. So the museum wants to reflect that, and it's the beginning of a process where the museum is going to look at everything and really, on the first level, start to tell different stories and fuller stories. So that's what happened to him. Really, he's still around. He's just like with his stuff now.
Yeah, so it's not about removing him, but you describe it as rewriting the narrative, putting his place into context.
Yeah, I mean, he's here. So all the people are screaming about it, you know, they're wrong, he's in here. Except now we're saying, and then he did this, and this is where he got that, and this is where he got this, and this is where he got this, and this is how he got that, and this is... So that's what a museum is kind of for, is to tell you information like that and let you think about it. So that's what we're doing, but he's still here.
It comes, doesn't it, in the week when we've had the row about last night of the proms, Rule Britannia. Boris Johnson saying that we've got to stop this cringing embarrassment about our history, and he described it a fight of self-recrimination and wetness. Is that what this is part of?
Well, look, from my point of view, it's called education. Nobody's embarrassed about anything. I mean, when you find out something, you relate to it, you react to it. I mean, that's really what's happening. You find out more and more information. That's what a museum does. It gets smarter and smarter and smarter, and then it adjusts itself. That's life. And for people to sort of rush around with their hair on fire saying, oh my God, I mean, this is a new discovery, and the museum is discovering things all the time, and there are going to be more things that are going to be happening in here that some people are going to be screaming about, but that's the museum learning, and that's the museum responding to its own learning. And as a public-facing institution, the museum has to listen to people too, not do what they say, but listen. And so it's a dynamic process. And we got a great director who's totally involved in that. I'm doing a project with him called The Era of Reclamation that's part of that. And the museum is going to adjust itself as it learns. And that's what it's about, as it learns. And that's what's exciting about being here now.
Musical theatre is on its way out of lockdown. Among the first shows where the curtain goes up will be Sleepless, a musical starring the singer Jay McGuiness from the boy band The Wanted. Here's just a sneak preview.
She had everything she wanted without asking life would bring. If she wanted gently waking, you can bet the birds would sing. Should she want a little sugar to sweeten up her tea, I'd make it even sweeter, perching Jonah on her knee.
Still got the pipes, doesn't he? Jay McGuiness, I'm pleased to say, joins us now on the programme. Jay, really good to see you this morning. Let's start by just telling us a little bit about the musical itself. Sleepless, based on Sleepless in Seattle. I mean, Tom Hanks, those are some shoes to fill.
Yeah, that's right. It's Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, who also did, not to be mixed with You've Got Mail. But I and Kimberly Walsh, who's also in the show, both have a little bit of history with Tom Hanks movies becoming musicals. We did Big last year, 2 years ago at the Dominion Theatre. So, yeah, we have a little bit of experience with that, and we've really enjoyed turning it into a big jazzy number.
So how have you guys been able to kind of come together to rehearse, to do the technical rehearsals in a time of a viral pandemic? There must have been some practicalities that you had to deal with.
Yeah, there were actually quite a lot. Obviously, rehearsals stopped a week before the show many, many months ago. And the only reason we were allowed to return and specifically rehearse is because we were tested. So every morning we have a swab either in the nose or the throat. And then we get a wristband, and then that means, you know, we're negative for that day. And aside from that testing, which means that we can get close for, you know, brief moments on stage when it's necessary, we then also have the regular stuff. So wearing face masks whenever we're not on stage, one-way systems, washing our hands, and socially distancing. And we invite our audience to socially distance and follow all those rules as well.
How confident are you that, you know, Theatreland is ready to open its doors, that it is fully aware of the risks involved in bringing large numbers of people together in one enclosed space?
Well, I think I'm not hugely confident. I just know that it can happen in very specific circumstances, and we need to try and spread those circumstances across the board. I think a lot of smaller theatres struggle, especially the older ones have tiny corridors, and that's a really hard problem to overcome. Maybe across the country, newer buildings will be able to do that, and I think the older buildings, if they're going to, you know, be able to confidently invite audiences back, I really think there'll probably have to be a huge investment on maybe removing some seating and making bar areas bigger, because if we do have to be socially distanced for many years to come, and maybe different pandemics in the future, theatres just stop.